Hey there, dirt bike people. I'm Chuck from TrueTech, and today I'm going to be assembling the power valve on a 2019 150 XCW. So I've already cleaned up the cylinder and I've wire wheeled the power valve flap, so everything's nice and clean and ready to go. And I'm just going to slip on the O-rings, one on each side. Then these little sleeves can go on. It's very common for one of them to have a little bit of burr, and sometimes you might need to file it, but in this case I just spun it a little bit and it slipped on. Now in most gasket kits, this fancy little O-ring is going to come in one piece with the top, and you have to trim it off. I've already done that, so we'll just drop it in like this. Then the exhaust flange can go on, and you can put the bolts in. Two of the bolts are going to have these little washers where the exhaust springs hook into, and they go on the bottom two bolts. Now I'm not going to lie, I don't use a torque wrench on this, but if you want to, the torque spec is 10 Newton meters or 7.5 foot-pounds. Now while you're tightening these bolts, it's important to lift the power valve flap up with your fingers. If you tighten these bolts with the power valve in the down position, it can actually get stuck between the flange and the cylinder, and it can break the nickel. Once you've got it tightened down, check to make sure that the power valve operates properly. Now we can slide the O-rings onto these little barrels. They're both the exact same, so you can't mix them up. These little 150 power valves bind up really easily during install. It's really important to make sure everything's nice and clean and lubricated. Obviously these bolts are in an environment where they're subject to a lot of vibration, so I definitely recommend using some Loctite. It's also important to put the Loctite in the female threads when installing a bolt into a blind hole. If you put it onto the bolt side, the air pressure in the hole pushes the Loctite out instead of coating the threads nicely. The torque on these tapered screws is 6 Newton meters or 4.5 foot-pounds. Next up are these two little plates. The one with the shorter nub on it goes on the left side. A little Loctite in the hole, and then this little plate can go on. This is the plate that sets the height of the power valve when it's in its closed position. The torque on this screw, as well as its corresponding partner on the other side, is 8 Newton meters or 6 foot-pounds. The plate on this side is essentially identical to the other one. Putting the spring on is where it gets a little complicated. If you get the order or the orientation of any of these parts wrong, the power valve will bind. Here you can see the bolt goes into this special stepped washer, which serves to locate this spring. Then this collar on the back side slides over the bolt and mates into this little plate. Again, a little Loctite in the hole, and then we can put this assembly down and thread it in about halfway. Then, using this little pick tool, I take the short end of the spring and pull it up over the nub on the plate. You need to make sure that the long side of the spring is seated right down onto the plate, and then this bolt can be tightened up all the way. Again, that's 8 Newton meters or 6 foot-pounds. Now do a final check for movement. If there's any binding, it's probably one of the washers in the spring mechanism. It's also a good idea to use a straight edge like this and check to make sure that the power valve isn't protruding into the cylinder at all, especially if you've had it replated. If you want to see more of this type of content, subscribe to the channel.